Everybody. All right, everybody want to come in, have a seat. Those who wish to be and go through numbers today. The rest of you, shoo. Stop talking. Gotta move on. Gotta get going. All right, let's come on and have a seat. So today we're going to be going through Numbers. Now, if you've never been through Numbers, it's not what you think it is. Well, it is partially, but then partially it's not. And someone's got the door going up again. Oh, yeah. Come on. Huh? Oh. All right. Jeez, guys, come on. Thank you. All right, let's pray first. Father, thank you so much for this. Thank you for helping us to get through this and for all the things you're going to be teaching us. We just commit this information to you in Jesus' name. When Israel left Egypt, I'm sure there's a couple things on their mind. Wow, where are we going? They never went anywhere before. They had no idea where they're going. How are we going to get there? I'm sure we're just going to walk. It's okay. Not too far. How long is it going to take? Probably a couple weeks. No big deal. We got just a little bit of walk here. God will just take it right up there. And they probably thought, we're going to walk right in and have no problems and get things going. And oh my gosh, I'm sure they had all these ideas in mind. But the problem is none of that happened to them. None of that happened. They had no clue what they were about to get into. And because of that, they get a little frustrated. And the frustration comes out in the book of Numbers. So when they got out, God took them to Mount Sinai. Well, they got to go through the Red Sea. All this, wonderful things God was doing. But then they go to Mount Sinai. And they wait for a year. A year. They don't know. We know it. We know that they're going to be that long. But they didn't know that. And by the way, when they're going to go out there, if you've seen their desert out there, there's nothing there. There's no food. There's no water. There's nothing. They got nothing. And so what will happen is that they're going to be eating the same exact food every single day for over a year. The same exact food, manna. I'm sure it was good, but think about it. Think of it. What do you stock your house? Well, I stock my house with manna. That's all I eat. Because that's all they ate. If they're thirsty, you can't just go to the Nile and get some water. You can't go to the green grass and get some other things. They got to go to God and say, God, we're thirsty. And be patient and let God do his work. But that really didn't happen that way either. The hard thing is that was, the reality of this whole thing of what they went through. So they went out, they got around here, they spent a year in Mount Sinai. And why are we sitting around for a year? Why can't we just walk right into the place? Well, they couldn't. But they didn't know that. They couldn't just walk right into the land and assume control because they had no clue of what they were doing. They had no government. They had no laws. They had no system of anything. God had to show them and teach them that system first. And he took a little while to do it. By the way, when they first got there, everything's going great. Then Moses left them for 40 days. Where's that Moses guy going? What happened to him? Hey, wait a minute. Isn't he the guy that brought us out here? Where's he at? 40 days he was gone. this is kind of where we find ourselves in Numbers. Numbers is a very interesting book, and we're going to go through some of it today. But you know what's interesting is they were there in the land for 40 years after that. You know, they get to Mount Sinai, they head on up, and then they have to go back, and we'll go into that today, of why they have to go back. But the key is, when they're in the land, walking around in the Sinai Peninsula, it's not that big. It's about 200 miles circumference. I mean, it's not that big of a place, and they're walking around there, hundreds of thousands of people. For 40 years, we know nothing was happened because God didn't really tell us. There's only a few minor things that we can see of what happened. What we know of happens before and after the 40 years of the wilderness. I even went to Josephus. It's like, what, Josephus tells you everything. If you guys ever read Josephus, he's the history, antiquities of the Jews. He's the history guy. And so Josephus basically told me everything that the Bible just said. And I'm like, well, that didn't help. I figured he'd know something that happened in 40 years. But they don't talk about it. So Exodus takes us from Egypt to Mount Sinai, the book of Exodus. So if you want to read Egypt to Mount Sinai and all the stuff that brings in within all the stories, that's Exodus. Leviticus, like we just went through the last couple days, provides almost no history, but it gives us information on how to set up worship. We talked about, the clean versus unclean, the law, how to set up the priestly worship, how to set up sacrifices. All of that was gone over in Leviticus. But most of the writings, Numbers gives us a census, a few more various laws, and a trip into Canaan. So the majority of our stories come from Numbers. But the thing about the Numbers is, and I was shocked when I really started studying this throughout, because the thing is, most of their writings deal with tragedy. Sadly, nothing good comes out of Numbers for the most part. It's sad, and it's depressing. But the good news is we can learn from it. So, once we get into Numbers in chapter 10, on the 20th day of the second month, the second year, the cloud lifted. Remember, they were there for a year, waiting around. Moses, when are we leaving? Come on, Moses, let's get going. I'm thirsty. Give me more food. The cloud lifted above the tabernacle, and the Israelites set out for the desert of Sinai. When they left that, they were heading in. They were ready. So you leave Mount Sinai, you're on your way up there. It may take a couple weeks. But the problem is, a few things happened during that time. Numbers never deal with the triumph. You know how the world says, it's the triumph of the human spirit, how they just conquered all. And no, that's not at all what happened. Sorry, this is depressing day. Instead, it shows tragedy of sin and the consequences. But again, we can learn from this. We can learn from this. Out of the hundreds of thousands of people who left Egypt, only 2 went into the promised land. Now, you're like, well, I thought a lot of people went in. They did. But of the people who left when they did, 2 made it. Moses was not one of them. Moses did not go into the promised land. Aaron did not go into the promised land. Miriam did not go into the promised land. Korah did not go into the promised land. Many of Aaron's sons did not go into the promised land. Only Caleb and Joshua, 2 people. So just think about it. You see the city of Philadelphia, all the people there, they leave and go on a pilgrimage, and out of those million people, whatever it is, 2 people actually make it. Wow. Probably never thought about that before, but it's true. Why is that? And what can we learn from this? Over the next couple weeks, this week and our last week coming up at the first week of September, we're going to be going over this. Now, Corinthians actually talks about this. We in the New Testament talks about this. It said, we should not commit sexual immorality as some did, and in one day 23,000 of them died. We should not test Christ as some of them did, and were killed by snakes. We do not grumble as some of them did, and were killed by a destroying angel. By the way, that's Numbers. That literally speaks of Numbers. Everything that it's talking about is all in Numbers. Okay? So, one thing I'd like you guys to do when you go home this week is I'd like you to start reading the book of Numbers. First 10 chapters is just counting. So you can skip them unless you really want to read the counting. Okay? Then they talk about silver trumpets and they have a few other things in there. But it's the stories in between some of these things that really, really are important. You're going to meet a guy named Balaam that was a real head scratcher. The good news is, as Corinthians goes on, these things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us. And that's what we're going to be going through today, in those. What can we learn from all of this, going through all of this? Because there is some major things to learn. Now, I mean, granted, you've learned so much in this class about the law, you're probably up to here with the law. But I'll tell you, you're going to read through Romans from now on, and you're never going to read Romans the same way again. Because you now know all about that. But how do we allow God to do things? The key with all of this is, and I want to keep this in the back of your mind, the key is we have to allow God to do whatever He wants to do, however He wants to do it, for as long as He wants to do it. That's the key. But it's also hard. So what was God's goal in all of this? Well, we talked from the very beginning, the first day of class. He wanted a people of His own to bring them into the land. God's job was, I'm going to get you here, and I'm going to bring you over here, and I'm going to prepare you for it. That was the goal. The second one is so that there would become a light to the Gentiles. Now, sadly, that didn't happen, but it was the desire. But God had to get them there first. And it took over a year to get to the place where they could jump off and go in. A year, over a year. Yet the people would make it very, very hard for God. They're going to frustrate Him in every way possible. Doing everything they can. I mean, it's going to be tough. And now, granted, that's why I started with what I started today, because it wasn't easy for them. We need to have compassion on these people because, they had no clue what was going on. All they know is this Moses guy's up there telling us all this stuff. Yeah, God speaks to him. God does these great things. But here's that Moses guy again. Yeah, you're going to see there's some problems with that. Understanding then that it's because you're righteous that the Lord your God has given you this land to possess. For you a stiff-necked people. Now, Deuteronomy I didn't put up there because Deuteronomy is basically Moses' farewell speeches. There's about 5 speeches from Moses. Here's farewell. So Deuteronomy was literally just a farewell speech. So I didn't really go into much because there's not much story in that. All right, the wide versus the narrow road of God. Now, I was thinking about this. I come from Colorado, and I come from the mountains of Colorado, so I'm used to driving in the mountains. Driving in the mountains is not easy. Now, first we have on this side, we have I-70 going up to the mountains. Beautiful, easy driving, no problems, long curves, no problem. You just put in cruise control and up through the mountains. But that's the wide road. It's the easy one to go down. The narrow road are the two guys over here. First one, Trail Ridge Pass. That's how much snow they get. That's a lot of snow. That's actually about 35 miles from where I grew up, is up there. And the next one down is Berthoud Pass. Notice the roads are what we call switchbacks. Like this. Hard roads to drive. You've got to make sure you are protecting your car when you go, especially going down. You can't ride your brakes. It drives me nuts when the tourists ride their brakes because I'm like, oh, they're probably just going to fail then. This is not, the narrow roads are hard roads to drive on. Mountain roads are tough. But the good news is, if you want to get to the beautiful part, if you want to get to the best, you got to take the narrow roads. If you want the easy way to get there and up to, get somewhere, or just drive through Colorado, you get the wide road. The narrow roads, what God's talking about, are hard roads. And this is going to be a hard journey for Israel and for us. If they had allowed God to do whatever He wished, things would have gone well for them. They could have been in within a year. A little over a year, they could have been in the land. Occupying the land, doing what they could have. They could have been there. But again, let's not get mad at them, because it had to have been hard for them. Let's talk about the first thing that happened. We want meat. All right. The rabble with them began to crave food. And again, Israel started wailing, said, if only we had meat to eat. Now, let me tell you something, guys. These stories, I don't pick all the stories, because some of them are just like little small things. I don't care about the small things. The big things. When stuff like this happens, the whole entire hundreds of thousands of people start wailing and getting mad. And they're wanting to kill Moses. That's why I say Moses had the toughest job of anybody. Moses had to put up with a lot of junk. Let me tell you, it was not very fun for the guy. But these guys wanted meat, and so instead of being patient and saying, God, hey man, could you provide us some meat? We'll be patient, we'll wait. Nope, we want meat now. We have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna. Ouch. Yeah, they ate manna, the same thing every single day. Had to have been frustrating. This was one of the many uprisings that Israel did during the Exodus. This was one of their first ones. Moses heard the people, every family, wailing at the end. Now notice it said every family. We're talking the whole place was in an uproar. At the end, the Lord became exceedingly angry, and Moses was troubled. Why do you think Moses was troubled with these people? No, he's not afraid of what God would do. That was a little troubled him, but not as much. I'm sorry? They weren't grateful, but that's not the problem for Moses. They wanted to kill him. Every time this stuff happens, guess who they go after? Not God. They go after the representative. Poor Moses. No wonder he was troubled. Now, I said every family. We're talking hundreds of thousands of people are really, really angry. And they're wanting to get you and get rid of you. So what happened is God actually did bring in quail. Tons of them. And they ate so much that they got tired of quail. God said, all right, you want it? Here it is. Take all you want. Now, they had animals with them. They could have butchered. But the thing is, they didn't want to do that because they needed to bring them into the land. You can't just butcher your animals. They needed those animals when they get to the land to breed and everything else. So they knew they couldn't do that. But this was the first thing. And the problem was, again, it wasn't the fact that they wanted meat. That's not the problem. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is how they did it. All right, God, we're tired of this. We're sick of this. Moses, we got to get rid of that Moses guy. Think of what would have happened if they would have got rid of Moses. They would have never went in. But Moses said, here among 600,000 men, and said, I will give them meat to eat. Would they have enough flocks and herds to feed them? And God said, nope, I'll send them the quail. And so God did. God sent the quail. Next, it gets worse. Miriam and Aaron oppose Moses. It's not like your sister and brother to go after you. Aaron the high priest, Miriam, which was one of the matriarchs of the people. There's nothing worse than upper management that opposes a leader. Look what Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses. They were spreading gossip, saying bad things about Moses behind his back. These are the people. These are his siblings. These guys are their friends. I mean, but they started saying bad things because of his Cushite wife. For he had married a Cushite. So we got to remember that Zipporah died. Zipporah died. His wife went from Midian, and then he married a Cushite. Let me show you where Cush is. Cush is right there. It's where Sudan is right today. Sudan. So it's right on the lower part of Egypt, up the Nile a little bit. That's where Cush is. But guys, I want to tell you something. It had nothing to do with his Cushite wife. It wasn't a prejudice thing or anything. We're going to see here. We're going to see exactly what it was. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Yes, ma'am. I don't know. That's a great question, actually. It's a great question. But he and most likely what it was it. Yeah, you would think, but I don't know. That's a great question. That's a great question. I have no idea why. But I'm sorry. Oh, she said, why did Moses not marry one of his own people? Why did he have to marry a Cushite? I don't know. Yeah, we don't know that. But the key is, it has nothing to do with being a Cushite, because look what it says. Hasn't he also spoken through us? Ooh, that's a little bit of a pride. We're spiritual like you are, Moses. We're just as spiritual as you are. I like what C.S. Lewis said. For pride is spiritual cancer. It eats the very possibility of love or contentment or even common sense. The key was, it had nothing to do with the wife. It had everything to do with, well, I'm just as spiritual as the preacher or the pastor of the church. I'm just as good as they are. Well, they think they're all high and mighty, but I'm a godly man too, or a godly woman. That's what they were doing. This is dangerous, and this is dangerous for the church.
Probably also thought he's their little brother. They were both older.
Exactly right. Good call on that one. I didn't think about that. You're right. He is their little brother. Good call. How did God deal with it? See, God takes that kind of stuff very seriously, especially if we go after any kind of leadership. We got to be careful, very careful, because the Bible says that all leadership is God ordained. God puts them there. We may not like the leadership. We may not like certain people in the leadership. But the key is we need to support them. All right. At once the Lord said to Miriam, Moses, and Aaron, come out of the tent of meeting, out to the tent of meeting, all three of you. Basically, God spoke and said, come see me. Kind of like getting called to the principal's office. When there is a prophet among you, the Lord said, I, the Lord, reveal myself. I speak to them in dreams. But this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak face to face. Does anybody know if anybody else in the Bible, I'm not talking Jesus, but anybody else in the Bible that God said that to? No, he never did. Prophets, he would dreams, visions. With him I speak clearly not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. This is what I'm saying why Moses, a few classes ago I was talking why I think Moses was probably one of the greatest guys in the Bible, because he knew God personally. And the thing is, but see, here's the problem. I didn't put this verse in there, but there's a verse in there that said Moses was the humblest man of anybody. He didn't ask for nothing. He didn't even want to do any of this. God just gave it to him. And all he was doing just being obedient. Why then were you not afraid to speak against him? Ouch. Because remember what they were doing? They were gossiping about him behind his back. God, I'm going to tell you, God does not take kindly to this kind of stuff because it destroys leadership, and if leadership is destroyed, the church goes down with it. Not a good thing. So, what happened then was God said, all right, you guys want to do this? And he basically made Miriam a leper. She turned white, flaky, leprosy. And let me tell you, what happens when you get that, because you're unclean, you go out of the camp for 7 days. She had to leave and go outside and live. Now, she was a very big person here. God literally took her down. Now, I question, why didn't he do this to Aaron? And I think the reason why, if you're probably thinking that, why didn't God do it to Aaron if he did to her? I think the reason why, because Aaron was the high priest, and he did not want to bring him down like that. He needed the people to look to him. But I think he made an example of Miriam. Not only did he make an example of her, but the people had to wait for her to come back to leave. They wanted to leave, but guess who we have to wait for? Ouch. That was probably very humbling. Yikes. All right, so now we get that we got that solved. Now, let's send some spies in there. The Lord says, send some men to the land of Canaan where I'm giving you. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders. So 12 leaders are going to head up to Canaan. You're going to go scout it out. Let us know what it's like. I mean, remember, they'd never been here before. They had no pictures. They didn't know movies. They had no the guy, what are those like, the guy with the books that does, Rick, whatever his name is, the books. He didn't have that to read. They were going to go in there and say, let's take a look, see what they said. But when they came back, they said, we can't attack these people. They're stronger than we are. And the spies did this. They spread Israelites they said bad things, and you don't want to go in there. So what they were doing is mingling amongst the people and saying, you don't want to go in there. Wait a minute, the whole goal of this whole thing was to go in there. And these guys are saying, you don't need to go in there. They're terrible. They're big. They're high. Now, there is some truth to this. Now, they were saying that, because there's more to it than that. I didn't get all the verses in there, but the thing is, they said they were giants, and yes, they were. They actually found 2 skeletons of women who are over 7 feet tall. Yeah, they were giants. But God brought them out, and God wanted them to trust him. That night, all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. Everybody. So when the spies came back, they went through all everywhere, and everybody went nuts. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, if only we had died in Egypt or this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to the land only to let us fall by the sword? Now, I did go on to saying, our children's going to be killed, and this is going to be killed, and that's going to be killed. They're all going to say, what's the problem here? No faith. After all God just did for them, after all God has done and provided daily, their food daily, get water, everything daily, and now they're basically saying, now that I see it, I don't think so, God. See you later. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Wait a minute. 600 years before, Abraham was telling Abraham, your people are going in there. And these people are saying, I don't think so, God. When God brings us through something really, really difficult, and we're like, I don't want to do that, we've got to trust Him. And that's how we learn from this. Trust in what He has. Do what He tells us. He knows way better than we do. Your children will be shepherds. So then what God did is said, okay, fine. You don't want to go in there? Well, now, think about this for a second. They didn't trust God. Do you think God would want to bring them in there if they didn't trust Him? Because the first time something would happen, what would they do? Exit, stage left. They'd be running away. If they don't trust God, God can't take them in there. He just can't. They weren't able to do this. So God said, your children will be shepherds for 40 years, suffering for your unfaithfulness. Did God do this to the kids? Ultimately. God didn't do this to the kids. They did it. Because they chose to not do what God wanted. They said, I'm not going to trust Him. The children had to suffer. Remember the second commandment. Remember we talked about with the second commandment. I am the God of jealous, punishing the children of the sins of the parents, third and fourth generation. The children suffered for the sins of their parents. This is what the second commandment's talking about. Children will suffer because of what we do. What we do will make, and I was reading a thing today from the 4th century, John Chrysostom, and he was saying the same thing. What we do is going to show the world who we are. The kids are destroyed. The kids had to pay for it. Anybody under the age of 20 had to grow up in the wilderness. The children suffered for the parents. So God didn't punish them, but the children did. The children had to pay for it, sadly, because of what the parents did. But guess what they decided to do? Ha! Okay, wait a minute. Oh, you know, wrong God, now that you're saying this, we're not going to go out. We're going to go in 40 years. And I just told them about my kids. I think we're going to go anyway. Have you ever done that before? When God puts something on your heart, you don't do it, but a little while later you said, I think I'll go. May not be the right thing to do. May not work that time. God is very specific on what He wants you to do. Now we're ready to go up in the land. Surely we have sinned. Hey, God. Ooh, sorry, dude. Didn't mean to do that. Hey, what were we saying about man? Of course we trust you. Yeah, let's go. But Moses said, why are you disobeying? Moses is like, what are you doing? You can't, no. God just said you don't go in. And if you don't go in, He ain't going to help you. Okay? Which they didn't, He goes, and He doesn't want you to go in at this point because they didn't trust in Him. Because guaranteed, if something bad would have happened and they had that little bit of faith in God, they would have ran. And they would have never made it to the land. So remember, God didn't do any of this. They did it. So what ended up happening is they went in. And they got their butts kicked. Talk about humiliating. They got humiliated. Because Moses said, I'm not leaving. And the ark's not going with you. I'm not going with you. Ark's not going with you. Aaron's not going with you. You're on your own. And they went. They got chased back. A bunch of them died. Chased back. All because they didn't trust in God. Now, granted, again, we got to be patient with these guys. These guys, it had to have been hard for them because they had no clue. We've got 20/20 hindsight. Say, we got the book. It says right here they succeeded. They did. It was hard for them. All right, let's talk about the next time that they decided to oppose Moses. So they're now got sent back to the land for 40 years. You're going to be in this land walking around in circles for 40 years. So what happened was, Dathan and Abiram, son of Elab, and On, son of Peleth, became insolent, rose up against Moses. Not a good idea. With them were 250 men, well-known community leaders. Okay? So it wasn't just a couple people. And again, remember, every one of these stories, it's not just a few people do this. It's that the whole place is in uproar. The whole place is, they're not, because, and so you've got to understand that God can't work with that. It's just like what a church is saying bad things about their pastor / preacher, whatever, and they're saying these things and they're undermining this and you think God can work in a church like that? This is the reason why we need to support our leadership, why we need to trust God, why we need to pray for our church, why we need to be here. We cannot be saying anything bad about people, because all it does is doesn't ultimately undermine the person per se, it undermines God, because God has put them there for a reason. So what they said was, you have gone too far. The whole community is holy. Uh-oh, spiritual pride again. Every one of them, hey, we're all holy. You're not great. You think you're all awesome, Moses. You're not as great as you think you are. Why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly? Meaning that they're saying, God, Moses, you think you're better than all of us. You think you're more holy than we are. Not a good idea. But they said, and so Moses said, look, come to the tent of meeting and let's deal with this. And they said, no. Moses was the leader. Come to the tent of meeting, Moses said. And they said, no, we won't. We're not going to come anywhere you are. Think of what would happen if God would have allowed that to happen. They literally would have usurped Moses. Aaron probably would have went next. They would have set their own people. You know, we see what the political people do all the time. They're always out for themselves. Everybody's out for themselves in the politics. And they undermine the other person, undermine the other person, undermine the other person. We can't undermine anybody in the church. We need to support our leadership, support our elders, support the people in our church, because we should never undermine them. So it said, "Is it enough that you have brought us out of the land, brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey?" Was Egypt flowing with milk and honey for them, or will they back there building pyramids? They forgot they were pyramid builders. They forgot they made rocks all day is what they did. They made the big stones for the pyramids. That's what they did all day long. Oh, but it was great. We missed the part in the Exodus was said they cried out to God because of their sufferings. They forgot that part. They forgot that part. And now you all want to lord it over us. So this is not good. Because the thing is, God brought them out. And again, guys, here's the point with all of this. You've got to get out. You've got to let God do what he needs to do to train you and teach you, do what you need to do. You've got to go and do the things he tells you to do, because if you do all those things, you know, we think about Deuteronomy 28. Anybody read Deuteronomy 28, the blessing and curses chapter? So you might want to read the blessing and curses chapter. It's a great chapter, Deuteronomy 28. Now, I know the charismatic church loved that. They're always, oh, God's going to bless us, bless us, bless us. They're missing the first part of the God bless us part, because it says in Deuteronomy 28, it says, if you fully obey what the Lord your God is telling you, then If you fully obey what God is telling you, then you get these things. Again, this is the narrow versus the wide road. The road in God is not easy. I beg your pardon, God says. I've never promised you a rose garden, the old song said. God said, I've never promised you a rose garden, but I promised I'd take care of you. Promise I'll feed you. You may not like what I feed you, but I'm going to feed you. It may take a long time to get where you need to go, but I'm going to get you there. It may not be very fun going through this, and you may have to have a hard time dealing with people, but I got to get you ready for this and make you the salt and the light of the earth. God is doing that for us. But the key is we have to do it His way. And that's where these guys really did. Now, we've got this. We're finishing this up right now. We're going to do the rest of it next time. But, so, you haven't brought us into a land of flowing with milk and honey. Wait a minute. Was it Moses' fault they didn't go into the land? This is after the spies, by the way. Whose fault was it that they didn't go in? Their parents. Their fault. These guys. It was their fault. But they blamed him. Have you ever blamed God for, God, I'm tired of this. I don't make enough money, God. I don't make this, God. I don't want this, God. I don't want this. And we just complain. But the reality is, God says, I promise you, I will do these things. You just got to do it His way. That's the narrow road, the hard, circular, slow road that's not easy to get up. That's the hard part. Do you want to treat these men like slaves? Moses didn't treat anybody like a slave. They just thought that they were better than Moses. They were tired of all the junk. They're tired of everything, and they're like, well, what's the problem, Moses? Who were they mad at? Was that? God. Who were they ultimately mad at? But who did they take it out on? This is one of the reasons why I never want to be an elder. Because let me tell you, everybody goes after those guys. It's tough. I wouldn't want to do what Jeff does, or Ryan does, or Isaac does. It's got to be hard. Because the thing is, if everybody's going to blame, if they're mad at God and they're struggling in their life and they're having a hard time in their life, who are they going to, they don't going to go to God. They're going to go after them. And that's a problem. So what ended up happening, so Moses said, all right, and they were talking about stoning him. Again, this happens a lot to him, poor guy. Moses said, well then, this is how you will know that the Lord has sent me to do all these things and that it was not he's like, this ain't my idea. I didn't bring you out here. None of this is my idea. And it wasn't. Seriously. Moses didn't do any of this. Moses just did what God told him to do. And it says, if these men die a natural death and suffer the fate of mankind, then God didn't send me. You guys know anybody know what happened to him? What happened to him? Yep, very good. I'm like, God opened up the ground, plop, they're gone. It's like, plop, back. I mean, God, He took them out. No, He took them out completely. And He did it in a very, very hardcore way. It was, you don't get the ground opening up and swallowing people every day. And their tents, everything goes down. So the key is these, again, we have to be patient. We have to let God do what He wants to do in us. One of the hard things for me is that coming to the Church of Christ, I come from other churches where I always played guitar. I was a lead guitar player, and I always played. And so I come to the Church of Christ, and I had a real hard time coming in and saying, well, I can't play my guitar. And God just says, but I want you to be here for right now. I want you to be here. And it's hard. But you know what? I come to realize that it's more important that I do what God wants me to do, when He wants me to do it, how He wants me to do it, why He wants me to do it, and it's less important of what I really want, because the reality is that God knows best. Remember, when they left Egypt, they had no clue it was going to take them over a year to get there. They had no clue they were going to stop in the desert for a year to sit by an ugly mountain. They had no clue they were going to have to eat the same food every single day. They had no clue that they're going to get thirsty and have to be patient and wait for God to bring water. They had no clue that they're not going to just walk right into the place and have everything given to them. They had no clue. Now, how we're going to contrast this is next week, or 2 weeks from now, we're going to see what it was really like going into the land. And you're going to look and say, oh my gosh, no wonder God prepared them. Because you got a guy named Balaam. You got a bunch of I'm sorry to say this, it's true, sex-crazed women over in Moab and Midian that really like the guys. A lot of bad things are going to happen. They've got people there to say you can't walk through our land. You got others saying they try to walk up, they're going to attack them. It's not going to be easy, but God is going to prepare them. Is there any questions? All right. So we don't have anything next week, but the week after is going to be the last week, and we're going to finish this up. And so the good news, we're going to finally get them into the land. Woohoo! All right, guys. See you later.